The following presentation was recorded live at the 2015 National Bioneers Conference. To learn more about Bioneers programs and media products, visit www.bioneers.org.
To have the opportunity to share this afternoon with this amazing and very talented group of women, speaking about art as a catalyst for positive transformation. I'm just going to quickly introduce everybody, and then the format for this afternoon is going to be everyone's going to talk for about 8 or 10 minutes. They're going to be approaching this issue from 4 different perspectives. And after that, we're going to break up into small groups so that you get to have a little more of a chance to have a little more intensive conversation about the area that you're interested in. And then we'll all come back and kind of do a report back so everyone can have an experience from the other little breakout groups. So our first speaker is going to be Favianna Rodriguez, who is an incredible activist and interdisciplinary artist. Our next speaker is going to be Alan Holt, who is the Associate Director at the Institute for Diversity in Art at Stanford University. She is also a playwright and an artist and a writer. And then our third panelist is Christian Frock, who is an educator and a curator who focuses on art in the public sphere. And I'm Dorka Keene, and I'm an arts commissioner and also a public artist. So we're going to start with Favianna.
I'm so excited to be here. You know, I know many of you, and I know you know of my work, and this is my first time at Bioneers, even though I grew up in Oakland. I've never attended Bioneers, so I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy that there's a space for art. So what I'm going to talk about is, we all understand that art matters in social change, and we all understand the power of art. But I think sometimes we're missing a framework to explain exactly why art can play such a transformative role in our work, where many of us are fighting for justice. And so I'm going to attempt to provide a framework for that, and just to help you think about some values around why this work is especially important for those of us working for social change, and then give you some examples. So first is that culture change precedes political change. And my friend Jeff Chang talks about how politics and policy change actually is the final manifestation of a cultural shift that has already happened, right? And so what this means is that many of the policy wins that we may understand, whether it's a win at the Supreme Court level or it's the election of Barack Obama, many of these things are climactic moments and they're events, but they are waves and there are currents and there are trends and ways of thinking that lead to that event. And that's what cultural space is. That's what the space of culture is. Culture is what surrounds us all the time. And it's the way that the images and the stories and the narratives and the ideas through which we form community. Now, culture changes us as much as we can change culture. And sometimes it takes one person to change culture, right? It takes somebody like Kanye West, who after Katrina said, Bush doesn't care about black people. Or it takes somebody like Lady Gaga to withdraw her support to Target and create cultural ripples, or a movement like Black Lives Matter to really just center a conversation that in the past hadn't been centered. The one thing about art is that so much of art is about how you see. It's about your frame, right? And often we learn in social justice organizing that we need to expand the frame, or the key word here, everyone says we have to change the narrative. I think that if we think about that, in the social justice space, while we all understand that we have to change the narrative, there's actually very little investment in arts and culture. As a matter of fact, artists and musicians are often have a very exploitative relationship with social justice groups. Social justice groups will call us when they need a poster, or when they need something done at the last minute, or when you need a musician at your events, or a poet. But there's really, what's missing is deep relationships with artists. Now, artists are also, if you look at the data on artists around the country, artists are workers. Artists are working class people. The median income for artists is $30,000 a year. 4 out of 5 artists are white. Working artists are white, which means that there's already a lot of barriers to becoming an artist. And if we understand that culture is a very, very powerful tool in transformation, let's think about who controls and who runs culture. Who are the forces that make your children's books, your comic books, the films you see? All of those things perpetuate the status quo. And all of those things work to solidify implicit bias, right? Whether it's implicit bias against Black people or against immigrants, or implicit bias in favor of cheap food as opposed to food that is nourishing and that's made in a healthy way, culture often works against us. And so it's always been, for me, interesting to see why as a sector, why as a social justice sector, and especially as an ecological sector, we invest so little in culture. I believe that it's important to bring artists to the table, because who makes culture, who creates culture is artists. And often artists, again, are seen at the sidelines, or they're seen as people to implement a political strategy. But what I am here to propose to you is to actually think of culture as the idea space. Okay, if you look at this image here, the action space, imagine the action space to be the space of policy, a space of laws, the space of urgency, right? And many of our movements sometimes, they're working against police brutality, or they're working against GMOs, or they're working against labor laws, right? And the action space is a space of urgency, and who gets to decide these laws? Well, it's majority white men in Congress, and often we're tailoring our messages to them, right? We want to get an op-ed in the New York Times and make sure that Senator XYZ reads it. The space of action is often a reactive space, which means that we are barely holding the line. We are in a constant state of reaction, and as a result, often we are stuck in a place of what's politically feasible, right? We have to think only according to what we can win in the political space. But I think often our action space is about the no, right? What we're against. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what we're for. Like, what does the yes look like, right? What is a future world where the gender binary doesn't exist, a world in which there's no exploitation, a world in which we're living in unison with the natural world? What does that look like and sound like? And where are the narratives for that? And this is why I propose that we have to also play in the idea space. And so when you are working with an artist who's working on that romantic comedy or that love novel or that 20-page book that's going to take 2 or 3 years, that's a worthwhile investment for our sector. It's important that we value artists and that we give them the space and the tools and the resources to create work in the idea space. Otherwise, we're just limited to what's politically feasible, and we're not living with our imagination. And I think imagination, Einstein said it, imagination is more important than knowledge. It's more powerful than knowledge. And if we can imagine, imagination really allows us to see ourselves in our full humanity. I very much believe that, and I'm going to show you some examples of how that happens and how I do that in my work. So first, when I was working in the migrant rights sector, there's an implicit bias in the minds of a lot of Americans, voters, that they think of Mexicans as cockroaches, right? They won't say that, but when they're asked to compare Mexicans to an insect or to an animal, they will think of cockroaches. In the same way that when you interview kids around whether they have a white doll and a black doll, and what doll they see as the nice doll, they'll choose the white doll. That's implicit bias. That's unconscious bias. So I created a campaign that was around seeing migrants as butterflies, as monarch butterflies, because the monarchs also cross borders, and really creating playful ways and positive ways for people to participate in creating their own wings and to understand that migration is a human phenomenon, that we do not recognize borders, butterflies don't recognize borders, human beings have been migrating since the beginning of time. And if I were to go to a politician and say, fuck your borders don't exist, they would laugh, and they can't do anything with that. But as an idea, nevertheless, the idea of no borders is still something we should dream about. I mean, the natural world doesn't recognize borders. And I created these projects where people could participate and own and create their own work within a container of an idea, which was the migration is beautiful. And I let people use it freely, but also really help them frame how this narrative was going to play out, which the narrative was not, stop deportations or give us citizenship. It was around migration is beautiful. Our migrant parents who migrated here did so because they loved us. That's a beautiful narrative. It's not a criminalized narrative. What you hear in the media is a narrative of criminality. And that narrative is so powerful that today you have 1,100 people deported every day. A lot of mothers, mostly mothers. And that to me means that the implicit bias that says that migrants are criminals is winning. So I believe that we can find another way. The story I'm going to close with, I'm running out of time here, but the story I'm going to close with is about abortion. So I had an abortion when I was 21 years old, and it was very, I was in the closet about it for 10 years, but I had an abortion and I was in the closet because I was a 4.2 college-bound student, full ride to UC Berkeley, head of my class, really the model young Latina. And although I was very focused on getting a good education. What I did not learn, I didn't learn how to have sex in a consensual, empowering way. In fact, I hardly got any sex education. And my family just had sex it was a silence thing. There was nothing was ever, the only time sex was, I talked about sex with anyone, it was always through a fear-based narrative, right? Again, don't get pregnant, you're gonna get an STD. And so I decided to come out as almost like as a performance and as a way to interrupt the public debate, because people think, oh, Latinas, they're very conservative, they probably don't have abortions. Well, that's a lie. 1 in 3 women in this country has an abortion. Many of them are Latinas. And I wanted to break that narrative, but I also wanted to talk about something bigger, which was around sexual rights and sexual justice. And so again, going to the space of ideas, and I wanted to talk about pussy power as well. I wanted to talk about this because at the core, abortion is a policy effect. The bigger problem here is that our young people don't get sex education, and young women grow up thinking that they're just somehow here for somebody else's pleasure. So that's what I wanted to disrupt. And this is an example of how, when you start with ideas, you can have a deeper impact on someone's imagination. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, I have to follow Favi. I don't have any coloring pages of vaginas. Bear with me while we get my less incendiary images. My name is Christian Frock. Thanks for coming into this windowless room with us today. This is a really good looking group, super diverse. I'm very excited about this. Thanks, Dorca. Thank you, Dorca, too, for having us. It's a great group. So I'm an independent curator, writer, and educator. I'm sort of the quintessential adjunct this semester. I teach at SFAI, CCA, and the California Institute for Integral Studies. And I'm also 2015-2016 Scholar in Residence at the Center for Art and Public Life at CCA this year, which is really exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the center. Visible Venue, the curatorial enterprise I started 10 years ago this month, collaborates with artists to present art in public spaces. It started as a very DIY, an experiment to think about how to create a public space outside of public spaces and to create public space and public expression online. My writing about art and public life and artists impacting social justice has been featured in The Guardian US. I actually have a piece coming out sometime in the next week about the Burning Man sculpture that's coming to my little village in San Leandro, which has erupted like one of the most interesting public art dialogues I've ever seen in San Leandro, mostly focused on whether or not the sculpture is nude. Like really angry letters to our 12-page newspaper, and lots of commentary on Nextdoor, which is a really interesting social platform for your talking with your neighbors. I've also done some writing for the San Francisco Chronicle, and I had a book come out this year with Chronicle Books called Unexpected Art. And my current exhibition, which also has a book of the same title and which features Favianna's work, is called Public Works Artist Interventions 1970s to Now, which is on view at Mills College Museum through December 13th. This is the front of Mills. This is the work of Susan O'Malley out front. And I am working on a show as yet untitled that will just open in a very short period of time from now in March at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, focused on art activism and innovation from the Bay Area, because it all comes from here, right? So that's really exciting when you think about all of those things, not necessarily all of the art. Obviously, there's artists in other places. But activism and innovation begins here and ripples out across the rest of the country. And so the exhibition is going to be looking at how artists are working. Favi is also in that show. I've just decided to work on everything with Favi from now on. But there are other artists as well. And this, I wanted to share this with you. This is an inscription on the back of Mills College Art Museum. It says, "Art remains the only way possible of speaking the truth." That's a Elizabeth Barrett quote that was inscribed on the building in the 1930s when it was built. And while we were laying out the show, we decided to light that as one of the artworks in the exhibition because it's true. And this is just a screenshot of the show that's on the Mills College Art Museum website. To give you an idea, there are 22 artists and collectives in the exhibition. It is all women, but we did not put that in the title. It was a low threshold experiment in seeing what it would be like to organize a show of all women without calling it a show of all women. And women are really happy about that. So it features 22 artists and collectives, all of whom have done radical interventions in public space, sometimes sanctioned, sometimes not, all relatively small gestures, a lot of DIY projects, and works that are all aimed at political change, sometimes in soft political activist ways, and sometimes in really radical, aggressive ways. And we have I'm lecturing on the 4th of November with Tanya Zimbardo, who co-curated the show with me. We have a performance on November 8th that's free to attend with Jennifer Wofford. And on December 6th, we have a intervention on the ferry between Oakland and San Francisco with Connie Hockaday. Those last two performances we did in collaboration with San Francisco nonprofit space Southern Exposure. And you can get more details about the show there. Here's a copy of the book, the cover of the book, featuring Bonnie Shirk's Sitting Still series from 1970, which was a very simple gesture. It anchors the exhibition, though. Oh, I realize now there's people sitting on the floor. There's still chairs up front, so come on up. Don't worry about walking through while people are talking. Okay. In 1970, Bonnie saw this intersection, which is the Army Street Exchange, where the freeway ended up going up, near her home, and dragged a armchair. The armchair actually might have been out in the center. She went out there in an evening gown and sat there and did a whole series like this around San Francisco, which at the time was a radical performative gesture, and it holds different significance now when you think about the sit-lie ordinance in San Francisco, which means that you can be cited for sitting still. The likelihood that you would be cited for sitting still if you're just Caucasian sitting still is less than if you're anyone else. But I have known artists who, Megan Wilson was taken into custody while working on a mural at Clarion Alley Project because she laid down on the ground to work on the bottom. I know, stop. That's right. And so, I mean, it goes back to me, this work also speaks to the chess players being taken off of Market Street, the people playing chess along Market Street, kind of in the Tenderloin area. They're no longer allowed on the street to play chess. And so a lot of the exhibition really looks at the ways in which public space has shrunk in response to privatization and development in San Francisco, but it's not just here. It's happening all over the country. And so Bonnie's work, we have 85 stills that are being shown as a slide projection in the exhibition, and it is a beautiful, huge projection when you walk in to see all of that work. And as I mentioned before, I'm also at the Center for Art and Public Life. I just brought a couple of screenshots to give you a bit of an orientation on what they do. The Center for Art and Public Life at CCA is a really extraordinary organization within a college setting. It was founded 15 years ago by Suzanne Lacey, who is very well known now, rebel rouser. And I'm there. They do several things, but basically I'll just focus on this blue business here. So the Center for Art and Public Life works with community-based partners and partner students, and actually funds students to work on socially engaged projects with specific communities over an extended period of time, sometimes 1 semester, sometimes 2 semesters. And they've been doing that for 15 years, and they've done projects all over the globe very quietly. They have projects that are specifically in Oakland, but they also have projects that have taken place in other countries. And I've basically been invited in to mine the archive and to think about the precedent for creating the project in 2000, which if you think about it was a particularly loaded time. I mean, that's the beginning of Homeland Security following 9/11, the real restriction on the Patriot Act, all kinds of things that came out of came out of 9/11 that were about restricting public expression and public space. And so the center began during this very heated time, and now it's in its 15th year. And we're going to be working on basically what I'm doing with them is working on a presentation that will be part of open engagement in the spring. I've got the 1 minute mark. And then just to give you a little background, this was a project I did yesterday with SF MoMA at the Maritime Museum in partnership with, Invisible Venue always collaborates with someone else. And so I collaborated with Ernest Jolly, Oakland-based artist Ernest Jolly. We invited African-American historian and Sergeant Johnson scholar John William Templeton to come have a conversation with us about Sergeant Johnson's unfinished mural. This is Gary Camilla speaking at the end of the day, but this is also an excellent image of Sergeant Johnson's unfinished mural when he was working, high-profile African-American artist working for the WPA in the 1930s. Really an amazing, radical legacy in San Francisco. I don't know that it could have happened anywhere else, to be honest with you. And one of the really amazing things about this mural, which is on the veranda looking out over the aquatic park and pretty much like paradise at sunset, I have to tell you. The green part of the wall shows where Sergeant Johnson walked off the job when he learned that during a period of economic crisis, the facilities were going to be privately rented, and there was going to be a private casino and dining room. And he supervised anywhere from 15 to 45 artists. He said, everybody, pack up and get out. We're not building a private dining room. So they painted the wall green, but it's still there. And I think sometimes the things that artists finish are really important, and sometimes the things that they don't are really important. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alon Holt. I am an artist, a mother. I particularly do my art through playwriting and screenwriting. And right now I am the Associate Director for the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, which is an academic program at Stanford University. And there my work is to bridge the gap between art practice and spiritual practice, particularly with students of color, particularly with queer-identified students and gender non-conforming students, so really the students that are most vulnerable to a lot of the injustices that are happening in our world. And these are the students that are calling themselves artists in my space. And so how do we really support artists is a question that I think about a lot in a real tangible way. So the class that I'm teaching this quarter, and I don't have any visuals, so it's all right here. The class I'm teaching this quarter is called Conjure and Manifest, Building a Sustainable Artistic Practice. And I called it that because I didn't want to scare off anybody by bringing in a lot of spiritual talk too far off in the front. But little did they know they were entering into a spiritual development class. And it was really beautiful because it opened the spiritual space to be accessible to people who are not represented on our main screen level. So like yoga for my students is something that they're not really trying to get into because it's a white thing. Meditation is something that's very scary because, one, it's scary because sitting with yourself is oftentimes very frightening, but also it's just, again, a lot of narratives around this is not for me. And I think that that is very, very scary because it is. And not only is it for you, it is of you. And so what a lot of my work is to remind my students that you created this and it is yours. And now I'm doing some work at reminding you of that, but also allowing you to step back into that power. And it's doing some great things. It's doing some great things. A lot of my students last year were involved with a lot of the activism surrounding Black Lives Matter. Surrounding Black Trans Lives Matter, surrounding Say Her Name. And they gave so much of themselves. About 68 of my students stood on the San Mateo Bridge during Martin Luther King Day, shut down that bridge during rush hour, and really declared that we are here. We are here even if your cars are trying to go to work. We are here even if you're late. We are here. And it was a beautiful thing. And I'm so proud of them. That was last year. This year, they came in the fall, and I never saw a group of students look so depleted in my life. And this was the beginning of fall quarter, and I'm a Stanford graduate, so I understand, like, winter gets really tough, and, like, the sun starts to set a lot quicker. And as we know, like, the sun is, especially if you're familiar with issues around depression, like, the sun is really important to, like, regulate yourself. And so I understand that winter can get tough, but when the students are coming and it's the first day of fall quarter, I think that's a huge red flag. And I felt that. So my class about building a sustainable artistic practice, for me, it quickly became clear that it's about building a sustainable spiritual practice, which for me is just about building a way to remind yourself every day, no matter what triggers may arise, that you're okay, and that you're seen, and that you're heard, and that you're supported. And at places like Stanford and many of the places around the Bay Area, we move so fast, and that's a way of kind of helping us to forget that sometimes when we slow down, we can say to ourselves, like, I'm not okay. And so allowing that space for my students to not only say that they're not okay, but to start to find ways to better ourselves. So wellness is something that we do a lot of. So they came in thinking that they were going to develop a spiritual practice, but for the first hour of our 2 hours together, we spend it taking care of each other. We spend it sitting in silence for 30 minutes, which for me still, as a practicing person, a person who meditates, a person who does yoga, it still can be a kind of hard thing, especially now that I'm stepping into more of a facilitator role. So I like to call myself an Afro-optimist. And what that means for me is I believe that there are two types of people in this world. One who believes that the things that happen to them are curses, and others who believe that the things that happen to them are cures. I'm tested on this often. It's easy to call something a cure when it makes you smile and feel good. It's hard to call something a cure when you're out there, like many of my students, and you're out on this bridge and you're just trying to say that you're here and alive, but now this year you're being called guilty in a court of law, and you're dealing with all of the repercussions now of our criminal justice system. So how do you remind students, artists, and activists, even during those times, that no, this is not a curse, this is a cure? And I think that when we start to shift that narrative, it does a lot for our sense of being. And I've seen it do a lot for them. And of course, I always say that healing is not something that happens like, poof, you're healed. You know, it's not like this magical game in that way. It's something that happens in like brief moments. It's like when the student who's in the back of the class during week 1, like, is the first one to go into a down dog in week 3. You know, like that is like a moment of healing when it's like, dude, like you did that, and like, how did it make you feel? You know. And so it's been some great work. But it's also been pretty difficult work because I'm realizing and how necessary it is to not only spread kind of this information, but to really step myself up and being. It just makes a difference that I'm a Black woman that's not a traditional yoga size figure that's leading this workshop. And I never knew that, you know, that's something that you don't know until like the person across from you who also looks like you feels like they can be welcomed into the space in a way that's not like isolating. And spaces can be isolating even if you don't intend them to be. You know, it's not enough to say without saying that all are welcome here, especially in spaces like this that tout like futurism. It's not enough to just say that. Like, you have to actively like bring people in who will bring other people in, and like, or actively say on your messaging, like, this is a trans-friendly space. This is a space that is safe for people of color, because we know that in the society that we live in right now, like, it's not. And being neutral on that train is not going to get us to the world that we want to live in. So my assignment last week was to imagine Stanford as a utopian space, which was interesting because there's this rub between Stanford is a utopian space because it's a highly privileged elitist university, but also that it's representative of every evil that the man has ever done to anybody and everything. So it's like this interesting rub, and a lot of my students kind of lie on that side. So what does it do to, for 5 to 10 minutes, say, now imagine something new, and allow us to imagine that with you. And so giving that space to my students has been pretty amazing. So I guess really all I wanted to say is how necessary it is to not only change the narratives, but also to live those changes. And so I'm living those changes. I'm learning to live more of those changes, but also like giving those changes out to others, especially artists. So how do you take care of artists? Really, it's by taking care of yourselves. And I tell it to my students, we oftentimes think of healers as those who heal others, but really healers are only able to heal themselves, and through healing themselves, offer inspiration for others to do similar work. So it's forced me to kind of raise my game up in a really beautiful way as well. And I invite you to do similar work, and I'm excited to share more about the things that happened in our class and are happening in our class in our breakout sessions. So thank you. I was one of those artists, Christian, that you talked about, who actually had the experience of having someone tell them to get off the street while we were sitting there working on our artwork, and it was right in front of the Twitter building. And I happen to know, as an arts commissioner, that you can actually sit on the street. Other artists probably would have been frightened by that experience, but the security guard who told us to leave was so afraid of losing his job that we actually moved so that we were underneath the security cameras so that the Twitter's security camera can watch us. So it's kind of amazing to live in a city where you can't even be creative, without being harassed by, some of the bigger entities there. But I really believe that artists should be at the table. They should be at every table. And if we're going to have social transformation, then we have to create opportunities for artists to be there. And right now, in many cities, there are some cities like Detroit, because artists are always on the cutting edge. They're the ones who come to a place this first, and they're the ones who get pushed out first. And so in places like Detroit, we see artists coming back into that community and really having an incredible impact on what's happening there. But in places like San Francisco and other cities, we're seeing artists that are being pushed out. So if we value arts and arts organizations, then how do we ensure that they stay so that we can continue to benefit from their inputs? And I think what most people don't realize, but what button? Highly technical over here. No, is that the, it's mine's on my computer. It's not on the black thing. On that black thing is that. Oh, okay, that's this thing. I see, all right.
Do you want me to move it so you have access to it?
No, do I just, there we go. Okay, all right. So one of the things that I really like to highlight is the economic impact of arts and arts organizations and how the creative economy is a huge financial benefactor to any city or town or community. The arts bring a lot of money into the economy, and artists and creative people bring a lot of money into the economy. And so I'm not going to read this, but can you guys see this in the back? All right. It generates $135 billion worth of economic activity in this country. And I think the bottom is really interesting, is that it generates $22 billion in revenue to local, state, and federal governments every year. Yet, nationally, the government only spends $4 billion on arts allocations. Now, I don't know if any of you are investors, but if you invested $4 billion and at the end of the year you got $22 billion, you would be doing really, really well. So with very small investment in the arts, and obviously there are other folks who are investing in the arts, private foundations and corporate foundations, individuals, but really the arts are a huge economic driver. And I think what we don't realize is how much money is actually brought into the economy when people go to events, when they go to, a play, or they go to a film screening or any kind of performance. Not only are they buying the ticket to go to that performance and supporting artists, but they're also probably getting daycare so that they can go out without their kids. They are going to the neighborhood and having a drink or having a meal, so they're supporting the local merchants there. They're going out maybe afterwards to a bar. So all of those things really play into how the arts support the economy. And it's not just about arts organizations, but it's about the entire community, the entire neighborhood. So arts are a vital part of our cities and our towns. And so what I think a lot of on the Arts Commission is how do we ensure that we continue to have artists and arts organizations in our city. In San Francisco, it's been dramatic, the loss of arts organizations, the loss of art galleries. And so a few years ago, one of the things that we started to do is we started to look at what arts organizations were out there and what their needs were. And what we found was that most arts organizations were being pushed out, as well as artists, and galleries were being pushed out of their spaces because they could no longer afford their spaces because other companies were coming in and bumping up the rent, right? So we worked with the mayor's office to get a couple $1 million from the mayor's office and started, with the help of the Rainin Foundation, an organization called CAST, the Community Arts Stabilization Trust. And it's really cutting edge. I mean, hasn't been done anywhere else in the country, where we are providing money to arts organizations to stabilize their leases or to buy their buildings. So in the first year that this has been enacted, we have worked to support 6 organizations with lease issues. We also just bought this building for Counterpulse. It's a building in the Tenderloin. It was the old Dollhouse Theater, so it's really, really cool that we were able to buy a building that was already a theater that is going to be continued to be used as a theater, and Counterpulse is never going to have to worry about rent again. They are going to own this building. So we're continuing that kind of work. We still have some of that, another $1 million left, so we're going to be continuing to work with other organizations. The other thing that we're doing in San Francisco, which is not particularly cutting edge, but it's cutting edge for San Francisco, is federally, artists are a protected class, which means that we can across the country, cities and states can build artist housing specifically for artists. We have not done that yet in San Francisco. We finally just got the okay this summer from the mayor and the city attorney to do this. This is Theaster Gates, who is an incredible artist in his own right, and he also has been in South Chicago buying up property. He started by basically buying a couple houses around his house. He bought this incredible old bank that he's turning into a cultural center. He also bought a series of buildings that he turned into artist housing. So I think these are models that we can look at across the country, where you can go into neighborhoods where there are already artists and start buying buildings. Because once you own it, you don't get kicked out. The other thing that we're working on in San Francisco is we're working at the planning department to rezone areas. So this is a typical building that an automotive shop might be in, or an artist, and it also happens to be a building that a lot of companies like to come in and take over. So how do we create that building, how do we allow it to benefit all the different entities? So one of the things that we're talking about doing with planning department is to zone that building so that it can go up, so the down part can stay that type. The top next 2 floors could be artist workspaces, and then the next 2 floors could be office spaces, which would be beneficial for the developer then to do the whole building, so that everyone wins. And then the last thing that we're doing is partnering with private entities. So this is Andy and Deborah Rappaport. Andy made a bunch of money in the tech world, and we talked to them about the need in San Francisco for gallery spaces. Last year alone, we lost 20 galleries. Those galleries represent a lot of artists, so because they too are being pushed out of the market. Well, Andy and Deborah aren't really people who are interested in doing nonprofit work, but they were interested in buying a building and providing gallery space at low market rates. So this is going to be an incredible building. It's so beautiful, the renderings of what it's going to look like, and it's going to have a cafe. And they've also just bought another neighboring building, and they're starting to have artist workspaces in there. So this is another way. So, you know, you can partner with government, you can partner with private entities to really ensure that you're going to have a city that has artists and arts organizations in them. One other thing that we're doing is I'm the co-founder of a project called Sights Unseen, because I really think that we need to bring the arts out into the community, and by doing that, you're also benefiting local businesses. So one of the things, this is a neighborhood, I don't know if you know San Francisco, this is right around Moscone Center. It's the neighborhood that has the least amount of public space in San Francisco. And it's a neighborhood that also has an identity crisis, and they really want to have more places where they can all hang out together. And so they did a huge master plan, and they said, you know, what can we do with these alleys? Well, one of the things that we've learned is that when you bring art someplace, it changes the dynamic of that place. So these are really sketchy 8 alleys. These are really sketchy alleys. And the idea is to program those alleys with public art. So there'll be permanent public art, there'll be temporary public art. There's also a huge arts ecosystem there, so we're collaborating with all the arts organizations in that neighborhood to do screenings in those neighborhoods, dance performances. We're working with the local businesses. There are businesses that are on those alleys, so they'll start feeling comfortable putting their cafe chairs out. They'll have events in the evening. There'll be music. There'll be food trucks, right? And this provides an opportunity, A, for people to experience art that maybe don't have the opportunity to go into a museum or don't want to go into a museum, but it also provides the opportunity for people to come together in a space that's theirs, where we're going to green it, we're going to put lighting in it, we're going to have art in it, and it's going to be an economic benefit for that neighborhood. So that's that. So I think what we're going to do now, if this sounds good to everybody, is that we're going to split up into 4 different groups. We have, 4, I think I'm personally really interested in all of them, areas looking at this issue. And we'll take about 15 minutes to, focus on the area that you're interested in. And then I think we can all come back and kind of have a report back, and then maybe some more general Q&A. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, so what if we have Christian in the back left, Alon in the back right, Favianna on the left here, and I'll be here on this side. And so we'll take like 15 minutes. Everyone can kind of split up. Okay, the themes are Favianna, how would you describe your theme?
I would say, oh man.
So Elan is art and spirituality. And I would say I'm kind of like art and economic development, maybe art in the city. Art and public space.
And art and movement building.
Art and movement building. Favianna, who's going to be right up here on the left. You guys, come on back, because we all want to hear from everybody. Hurdy? Yeah. So who from Favianna's is gonna who? Okay, so we're gonna hear from Favianna's group. Do you want to come up here so everyone can see you? And if this is better, you can use. You want to just use this one?
I didn't know I was going to take the podium.
So just a couple minutes.
Okay, sure.
Highlights.
So we had a lot of great discussion. There were a lot of artists in our group and people who worked with artists. We had folks share about work they'd done, about novels they've read that made them a progressive for the rest of their lives, the impact of art on people's lives. And then we tapped Favianna's very strategic mind about just what's the best way to use art to create movements. And I wrote down the tips she gave us, and I will share them with you. You must find the right artists, so they should be artists who really understand the issues and who you can really trust. And you should have resources not just for the artists, but also for the promotion of the project. So for like a PR person, maybe a designer of the promotional material, someone who can pitch to the media, because that can make or break your project. You should provide artists with as much inspiration as possible. So very important not to say like, this is what the final piece should look like, but but you're allowed to say, like, we want a novel, we want a film. But you should actually give them an opportunity to connect with the subject matter. So, be able to connect with people who are being impacted by climate change or connect with immigrants, and so they can feel it themselves and then be inspired through that. And give them time to do their work. Don't rush it. It might take a long time, so you should have deadlines, but they should be give the artist plenty of time to do their work and allow the artist to lead in the creative parts. Then we also talked about narratives and movement building. So what narratives are you trying to shift? You should know. And they should not be too big, otherwise it might not happen. And we talked a lot about how building empathy is really like the winning strategy. How when people feel like wow or whoa or that's awesome feelings, they share that more, and that's what we want to do. We want people to share, and a great way to generate those feelings is through storytelling, through individual stories. We also want to understand what's the opposition saying, so how can our stories work to rewire people to the image, to the frame that we want them to have. And we want to be clear on what emotions we want to stir up. Again, empathy is good. If it's a negative feeling we want to stir up, then we need to also be clear on, okay, well, what's this next steps? How is that going to be passed on or translate to positive action? And it's really good, especially with millennials, to have a participatory activity that goes with your product. So it might be like a discussion guide, or like with Favianna's butterflies, like these options to create your own butterflies. I think you did that. I got that from the slides. You should know your audience, be specific. Where are they? Where do you want them to be? What else? Oh, this was my last note. What does it mean? Yes, when people are presented in multidimensional ways, then we are able to connect with them more. So when we show people in their full humanity, it allows people to connect with them from across the board. Favi gave the example of Ellen coming out on national TV, and people felt connected to her and her multidimensional humanity. And at that time, we also saw a lot of movement towards gay rights. So that is our summary.
Someone from another group. Perfect.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. All right. I was working with this lady here. We talked about one gentleman mentioned an artist resource center, like a creativity cafe, where a place where artists and the public can interact and and have a collaborative space for creating movements or creating different kinds of projects that a particular neighborhood would be invested in. And you mentioned that it's always important to ask permission when going into communities where you are not a resident, because you cannot impose. You need to get, investment in that. Another young man asked, how can one motivate neighborhood residents to embrace and support the arts, especially with mural projects and things? And so we talked about collaborating with the education system, go to the school kids, go to the higher ed too. If there's a community college in there, there's going to be kids who want to paint murals or do public art projects. I would also say because this is my experience, I'll do it real quick. We had the Rotary Club, I think it was Rotary, one of those service organizations approached me to get a student to paint one of those shipping containers that was used to house we have a Rails to Trails program, and they kept all their things to keep the Rails to Trails area nice, but the C-Train thing was ugly. So they came to me and said, can you find us a student who can paint this? And we did, and and they paid the student, and so we have, everybody won. Kid got a professional art credit for this big mural. He got paid, so he's a professional artist now. Rotary Club got something nice out of it, and we have Rails to Trails. So everybody won. So anyway, so I would suggest doing that too. And when art starts happening in such areas, people start congregating more because it becomes a place where they want to hang out, because I think we're hardwired for art. I think we really are. Someone else asked about the financing model, and we're talking about, one, building houses for artists, providing locations for galleries that are low cost, and also helping galleries and art organizations to purchase their spaces so they never have to pay rent again. As a nonprofit, then they wouldn't have to pay taxes either, probably. And also that you can get, public money, if the city recognizes the value of art, get that public money, and that public money may attract some private money, and so you can develop that public-private partnership. And art really is a priority. Art can be a priority between the citizens and the government, the local government. And then someone did ask too about artists as a protected class for housing development. And I did not know this, so I've learned something new today, more than one thing, that the TARP program was federal legislation started under Bush. Artists gained a special classification that allowed cities and governments to do something for artists, such as build housing for them. And San Francisco is currently working on this, but other cities have been doing this for a while. And that would be very interesting to see. Where I come from in Fresno, our whole downtown is getting built up, and we're trying to bring in, we have $3 million worth of art down there, and no one goes to see it, including a Renoir, that there's only 6 of them in the entire world, and we have one, and people they don't go and see it. So now they're really trying to develop this, but I'm thinking I'm going to go talk to some people when I get back from Bioneers about places for artists. So I think that's it, and if anyone's in that group with me, did I miss anything?
That was great.
Okay.
What about someone from Alan's group? Someone? Great. Come on up.
Hey guys. Hey, I'm Melanie. In our group, we talked about art and spirituality and the question of how it correlated, and kind of just had an open space and free-forming dialogue conversations between us. And for that question, I personally responded with how I see art and spirituality. It's a ritual, and through art you can create so much, and also to really ground yourself and to be able to calm yourself down through different practices, whether it be through movement, through spoken word, music, drawing, anything that really like fills your heart up and your soul, and that's really important. And those are part of things like that's spirituality. It's embodying all of your inner virtues, and art can be a part of that, and it is a part of that because we all are artists, activists, and healers. And we also talked like along that going into calmness and really just taking that time to yourself, and that can be through all these forms of art. And was it Anne Catherine also told us that she makes these structures in the deserts that you can just be calm in, correct? Yes. It sounds beautiful, and I'm excited to look that up more, more information. And it's important for the first 20 minutes of each day, because that was advised that it sets your day. So with that, that's the time that you can put your rituals into practice, whether it be just light stretching in the morning, and to get really like your blood flowing and the oxygen running through your body, and just taking that time to yourself every day is really important. If it's not the first 20, maybe like midday, if you're in the normal world working and life gets a little hectic, like, hey, go outside, breathe, look at the sky, it's a beautiful day. And breathing is very important.
Do you want me to stand with you?
Sure. We're going to tag
We're
team
going to stand together.
because there was.
'Cause not everyone likes talking in public. But you're going to read the notes, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we started with a question about museums into streets and the access into museums, and a first response was that they tend to be really expensive. And then there was a project at MoMA.
So can I help?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about how there's more museums going out into public space instead of expecting people to come in. And part of that is because museums have become very expensive. And part of it is because museums are a dying breed. You've got a Renoir in town and no one will come into the museum. How do you get it outside of the museum? And so there are a lot of initiatives moving towards that. And what do we say about SSMOMA?
The
There's a
ground floor. Yeah.
I've been told that the whole ground floor of the new museum is going to be free when it reopens in the spring. So even if you don't have, I have not yet been told how much the museum is going to cost to get into. No one has been able to tell me that yet. But I do know that you'll be able to wander the whole ground floor for free as soon as it opens.
And the Broad Museum that just opened in Broad
The
Museum
Broad,
that just opened
yeah.
in LA is totally free.
Yeah.
Totally free.
Well, he can afford to make his museum free, and he should.
Well, it's cool that he did.
Yeah, it's cool. It is cool, and he should.
There's also the James Irvine Foundation.
So
was brought up in
we
that.
talked a little bit about private philanthropy and how the James Irvine Foundation is a great example. It was founded in the 30s by an agriculturalist who basically put all of his Irvine, a third of Irvine, into land trust. And now the Irvine Foundation, I don't work for them. I just interviewed a program officer, which is how I happen to know this. But they've cultivated their wealth since the foundation was developed, and they give away $650 million annually for art, youth, and politics, specifically to better the lives of Californians. And so that's a really interesting way of thinking about what private money can do, specifically for public good.
I'm going to run through a few of them.
Yeah.
There was a question about, or there's this thought of, if you ask an artist, or if you ask somebody if they're an artist, they'll be hesitant even if they're just taking a break, like a 2-month break from making art, and asking the question if they like making art. There's a distinguishing between those two. There was a question about placemaking and bringing art activities into non-commercial places, public places, and I don't remember the name of the project, or the luggage store in San Francisco is doing knitting
Crochet.
or crochet
Yeah.
project in the Tenderloin. And then there's a question of, maybe you could talk more about the working for yourself is actually like having a lot of bosses.
Was that part of this? Yes.
And but specifically that she writes for The Guardian, KQED, other small publishers, and just like is in a lot of different places. And you work on a project called The Invisible Venue, which is called that because it was started online. And a question about issues, having different issues in Toronto and other places, and informal art spaces being taken by formal spaces, and then a lot on, there was Theater Gates.
The Astor Gates, artist-led initiatives like what Dorka talked about. Also, Rick Lowe is another great example. But there are many examples of artist-led initiatives to tackle big city issues or even political lobbying. A lot of artists like that are in my show, actually. I mean, Favi is also like that. And those are grassroots artist-led initiatives. That means you can do it. You don't have to wait for somebody else to do it. You can start today. Whatever the thing is that you care about.
And then we talked about the exodus of artists from San Francisco and moving to places like Detroit, and there being a lot of contract work at universities, and that's what I got.
Yeah, we were all over the place. Okay, thanks, Alex.
So thank you everyone for being here. The one thing that really everyone can do is to support the arts by going to shows, going to buying art. And we have Favianna here who is going to have her art in the back here for sale. Art right out front. I'm doing a book signing right after this. And Christian has her show at Mills until December 13th, so go see that. That is one of the most important ways that you can support the arts and be part of the arts, is support the local artists and arts organizations and nonprofits in your community. So thanks everyone for being here. Thank you so much. And thanks to the panelists.